And we are live, and would like to say howdy to everybody, say hello to you, and we're going to go to Hebrews 11, and we're going to go to Judges chapter 6. So I don't have anybody here yet, so I'll wait just a minute for some people to come into our chat room. And in the meantime, you're going to be turning to Hebrews chapter 11. I'm going to wait just a minute and let more people get in. Glad you could join us, though, and be with us. So, again, turn to Hebrews 11 and turn to Judges chapter 6. Not going to spend much time in Hebrews 11. We're going to be talking about Gideon. So, I want to put that here. We looked at the introduction to Gideon last week, and I'm going to go more into Gideon this week. We looked at the background. So all we are seeing in Hebrews 11 about Gideon is that the Hebrews writer says in verse 32, "And what more shall I say, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon." He goes on and lists others that perhaps we'll get to later, but we're going to go to Gideon. And to go to Gideon, we have to go to the book of Judges, chapter 6. And so I'm going to wait for people to get on here. And while we are getting on here, let me make this announcement. We discussed at the building, and I discussed with some of you on the text the timing of our Wednesday night YouTube streams. I need to move it back an hour to 7 o'clock. So far, everybody that has talked to me about it said that would be good with them. So I don't have anybody here on the chat yet, but everybody said that will be good. So I'm going to go ahead with what the people who have commented back to me, and I'm going to say, let's go ahead and meet next week here at YouTube for 7 o'clock. And oh, we got somebody, Cookie. Cookie, there you are. And all I can say is, here I am. So, hey, Cookie, so good to see you pop up here with us. And we're talking about 7 o'clock for next week. And we'll, as I said, we'll start it at 6, and could be that some people were thinking we're doing it at 7 here. So, all right. Hey, we're going to talk about Gideon. So, and oh, Shonda's here. Hey, Shonda. Hello. Again, we're going to have it start meeting at 7 on YouTube next week. And that's going to help me with my school, help me to get back here. Even though technically on Wednesdays they're not having classes, I know we're doing a lot of work at the schools on Wednesdays. We're actually still meeting with some students who are coming up and taking tests, and we're having and doing things, just the teachers. So, and I'm been staying a little late. We're going to go ahead then next week. We'll start next Wednesday at 7. So I went to Hebrews 11. Once again, all it said there is that time would forbid them to tell, not permit him to tell the writer of Gideon. That's where we're going to go to Gideon. And Wendy is here. Hello. Okay. Wendy, cute emoji. Okay, so I'm going to go to Judges chapter 6. In last week's lesson, we have the children of Israel. And when the story of Gideon begins, the children of Israel, I'm just going to start with a very simple question. In the beginning of the story of Gideon, were the children of Israel good or evil? Were they being good, or they acting evil? Were they being evil? There's ESG 1977 with that heart, that love. And Patrick, Patrick, boo, love it. Uh, so this is my question: were the children of Israel in the beginning of Judges 6 being evil, or were they being good? Talk about that. We do have 9 guests on our number of people. So that just went down to 8. I know that some of you have said that it comes in and out for you. So were the children of Israel being good, or were they being evil is a question. And Cookie has answered that, and she has answered that correctly. They were being evil. And we'll see this cycle in the book of Judges. The children of Israel will, let's just start with them being good under a judge. Now, the judges were who were ruling the land at this time, and the judges would keep the whole nation in line, so to speak, with God. When that judge would die, the children of Israel so often would get a little bit worse and a little bit worse until they just got so evil that God would let a surrounding country come in and take over them. And then the children of Israel would turn and start being real good. They would repent and they would call for help, call to the Lord for help. And when they would do that, a judge would get them out of the trouble that they were in with the enemy, and they would start being good again. And as long as that judge lived, they would be good. And then when that judge died, that cycle would start all over again. Get real evil, get in trouble, call to God for help, get delivered, start being good again. And Rhonda says, I'm just now here. Very good. Hey, Rhonda. So good to have you. So let's look now at the book of Judges. And we said that the children of Israel had been good. And what was the name of the country or the people who invaded Israel? What was the name of the country, of the people who invaded Israel? The main one. Actually, 2 or 3 are mentioned. But what was the name of the people who invaded Israel, because Israel had been so bad? So if you think and turn and talk about that at your house, and see if you can come up with an answer. And if you're on the chat, see if you can put it up here. Who were the people who were oppressing Israel? And if you can put it in here on the chat, put it in here. My question is, who were the people who were oppressing evil? Okay, Rob, I can't put answers because I'm driving. Okay, well, that sounds good. And now, next time, don't put yourself out just to tell me you're driving. Just to tell me you're driving. I'll just wait. Okay, don't anybody put themselves in trouble. But I'm just glad you're listening. Okay, Drew says, "Is it the Philistines?" And no, the Philistines were not the main ones this time. Cookie asked for me to retell the chapter. I will gladly do that. That is Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6. And we're looking for the people who are oppressing Israel. And it wasn't just this group, but this was the main group of people. And it's Judges chapter 6. You know what I could do? I could, if somebody else, say somebody joined our chat later, if I put Judges chapter 6, typed it in, they would see that and they might know right where we are. There we go. Now, got that put in. But who are the people? There we go. Midian, the Midianites. And I always remember this in this way. It rhymes with Gideon. Okay. Think of Gideon, Midian. Okay. Midian, Gideon. That was who were the people who were taking over and oppressing. And what kind of animal? And then Wendy mentions also, let me go back. The Amalekites and the people of the east were with the Midianites. What kind of animal were the Midianites using for war? There was a certain animal, and this is the first time in the Bible we see this type of animal used for war. We see it before, actually see it. Here's a hint. We see it with Rebecca. When we meet Rebecca, this animal plays a part in it. What kind of animal did the Midianites use for their war, for their invasion, for their coming into this land and just taking over? Cells? Ah, yeah, I bet you were trying to type that. Camels. Yes, camels. Camels were a war. I was gonna say a war horse, but camels were a beast of war, and they would use them, and they were coming in. And the Bible uses this term. It says that the people and the camels were as thick as something else. What did they say that these hordes of people and camels were as thick as? They were as thick or as many of them as something else. There were so many of them. And they would come through and they would take everything the Israelites had. And there were so many. They were as numerous as what? Grasshoppers. Yes, I would gladly accept that. Or what's another word that they called grasshoppers? It's another term for that. And or locusts. Yes, and locust we know is a type of like grasshopper, uh, bug, insect, whatever. So these insects called locusts or grasshoppers, when they came as a plague, there were so many of them. And we talked about last week how they also came in Egypt, the actual locusts themselves. But these people from Midian, there were so many of them. Can you imagine what a horde? So, how many years did Midian oppress Israel? For how many years did Midian oppress, take over, harass, whatever word you want to use there, Israel? How many years did they do this? They came up against Israel and they prevailed against them. And God delivered them into the hand of the Midianites for how many years? Got some answers coming in. And if you've not found it, I actually went back up here. It's in the first verse, everybody, of Judges 7. I'm sorry, Judges 6. Judges chapter 6. The answer is 7. The answer is 7. So, for 7 years, these people came in and harassed, took over, stole, got what the Israelites grew. Now, there is something I would like to say about that I didn't say last week, and that was this. We are now, according to what I've studied, about 200 years away from Moses, after Moses. We are after the conquest of Canaan. And here is this new generation of people. And back before this, we need to remember that the Israelites had fought the Midianites before. And in Numbers chapter 31, the Midianites were defeated by the Israelites under Moses. And here we are around 200 years later. They have recovered their strength, and God uses them as sort of a rod of punishment against the Israelites for how rebellious they were. So these people at one time were defeated, but now they've come back, and you can, how can I say this? There is no doubt, in my mind at least, that they remembered what the Israelites had done to them 200 years before. I mean, we know things that happened 200 years ago, and they came back and they took over their land again. It would be quite equivalent to the Native American tribes rising up and regaining this land, and God giving us into their hand, multiplying them as numerous as locusts. And that happened right here in about the same time time reference that we have been in America. So this was about 200 years. And they were just a lot like America, really. The Israelites were a new country. This is their new land. And here, 200 years into it, this group of people has come back and taken back over what a lot of the areas were theirs. And same thing with the Amalekites and some of the people of the east coming in. Some of this land would have been theirs before, and they would have laid claim to it. And so, where do the Israelites go when the Midianites come into the land? So that's my next question I wanted to ask you. Where do the Israelites go when the Midianites come into the land? More than one place is mentioned, actually. And I, by the way, have tried to darken when I leave this screen to go to my reading screen. I've tried to darken it so it wouldn't be so bright on my face. We'll see. I hope that when I look at the video, I can tell. But where did the people of Israel go when the Midianites came in? So if you'll answer that, and actually 3 different locations are given: mountains and caves and strongholds. Yes, mountains, caves, and strongholds, places they could hide out and be safe. So they had to leave their beautiful houses that they had, vineyards that they did not have to plant, gardens built for them, a move-in place. Looking at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 11, he mentions hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant. This was their place that they were given. And Joshua chapter 24, verse 13, where he gives the same or similar warning as is given in Deuteronomy 6, he says, you eat of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Now, this was what he was warning them. When you get to doing this, don't get too comfortable and think that you don't need God. But they did. And this is where we come to Gideon. Now, before God sent Gideon, who did God send to the Israelites? Before he sent Gideon, who did God send to the Israelites? It is a very important thing that he did. He sent someone before he sent Gideon. And we said it was very similar to when God sent John the Baptist to get the way ready for Jesus. God sent somebody and got them ready for Gideon, didn't he? Who did God send? I'll let you talk about that in your homes and put that up here on the chat just a minute. Okay, not an angel. Yes, a prophet. He sent a prophet. And this is found in Judges chapter 6, verse 8, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel who said to them, and then we have what the prophet says, a sermon that tells them, this is happening because you would not obey my voice. Now, that answer that you gave, Cookie, is not far off, because after the prophet, we do see an angel coming. An angel comes, and that's where I want us to start right here. Okay. I'm reading what Wendy says. Moses delivered them out of Egypt. Yes, he did. This is after Moses. I'm trying to go with where you're going on this, Wendy. Are you talking about beforehand? Is that what you mean? Moses delivered them out of Egypt. Well, I guess you could say technically, even before Gideon, you had Moses. I guess that's what you mean, maybe. But I was talking about like right before Gideon got there, he sent a prophet to him. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead with this angel too. There's an angel that comes, and let me just read the story. Let's just go now to Judges chapter 6. Why don't we do that? And I'm going to look at verse 11. Judges chapter 6, verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress, in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Gideon said to him, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" So he said to him, "Oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man." Then he said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you." And he said, "I will wait until you come back." So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now Gideon perceived that he was an angel, the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." Then the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die." So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it is still in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another, Who has done this thing? And when they had inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the city said to Joash, Bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it. Joash said to those who stood against him, Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. Therefore, on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar. Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. So Gideon said to God, If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowlful of water. Then Gideon said to God, Do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground. Okay. I want to go back up to where we started. There's a lot that's happened. And as much as I want to go on in this story, we have finished this chapter, and there are so many things I want to go back and touch on something. Oh, sorry, I misread. Just okay. All right. Okay, this is to Wendy. Okay, I want to go back and look at some of the lessons we can get just at where we are, because I don't want to just gloss over and just get to the battle scene, because there's a lot here that we need to discuss. Now, the name Gideon means hewer, Hewer, or feller. Now, not we say that's somebody. He's a good feller. Talk about someone who fells like trees, cuts down something. That's what the name means. And he was the youngest son of Joash. They were of the clan of Abiezer, and I hope I'm saying that name right. And they were the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, now let's go back to something I said in a lesson a long time ago about Joseph. Joseph married an idol priest's daughter, and we see Joseph's descendants here worshiping idols. This should not be a surprise. Now, they weren't the only ones, let me say that too. But they are so full of their idolatry, they threatened to kill Gideon for trying to go back to the Lord. However, here they are of the tribe of Manasseh. Remember, we have in Joseph, we had Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons. And those two sons became a tribe apiece. So their home was in Ophrah, and we don't know exactly where that is. There's about a dozen different locations that through the years have been spotted and said that it was this place, Ophrah. There's a likely location near Mount Tabor that we could just go on and on with all of that. But anyway, there was a shrine of Baal. Now, Baal, B-A-A-L, was a god that the Canaanites worshipped. He was an idol. And when they came into the land of Canaan, this god was already there. Now, they didn't worship the gods of the Egyptians anymore. Now, remember, they did try to worship the golden calf, but that would have been an Egyptian influence. This generation here in Gideon is a new group of people, and God warned them about worshiping the idols that the people in Canaan worshiped. In fact, they were to kill out these people many times, and sometimes they didn't, and then they ended up worshiping their gods. But this god Baal will reoccur several times throughout the Old Testament. We'll see, for example, Jezebel was one of Baal's worshippers, and some others throughout the Israelite history. I feel like I'm tripping over my tongue tonight. Throughout the Israelite history, and looking at this, it's very possible that they had kind of combined the two, the worship of God and the worship of Baal. It is a dangerous thing when we take a part of worship or a being that is worshiped and combine it with the worship of the true God. It is a dangerous thing. I was watching a documentary on some of the Native American churches that were taking part of their old ancestral worship and combining it with Christianity, or at least some form of it, and making a conglomerate religion. That what is happening here, that is exactly what was happening to the people here in Judges chapter 6. And I have much Native American blood in me. So I'm really talking about one side of my family meeting with the other side of my family. But the worship of God, when we see verses that say what Jesus said, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. He said that straight to Satan when Satan tempted him in Matthew chapter 4. It is dangerous to mix things. Solomon tried to mix things too. He tried to marry into different countries women and pull in their idolatrous worship into the country of Israel. It did not work then either, because it brought idolatry into the land. And we see too that Jesus said, if you're not for me, you're against me. Excuse me. And we're either for God or we're not. These people here in Judges chapter 6, they had combined the worship of God with the worship of Baal. They had no business having the worship of Baal. And here they are worshiping this, where they had mixed this together. And here Gideon comes and destroys this altar and destroys the shrine of Baal, and he offers a bull onto the altar. He gets 10 people to help him. God said to do it. Now, and this is something I want to address too. He got 10 people to do this with him, and that does not mean that he disobeyed God. Somebody says, well, yes, we built a house. Well, that doesn't mean that you built the whole house. That may mean that you hired the house done. Yet, because you were the one behind it, the one hiring, you were the one who built the house. Well, that was the way here. Gideon still did it. He had help to do it, and it was a kind of a big thing to do. But anyway, looking at this, I want to talk about the fact that these people were so entrenched in their idols that they wanted to kill Gideon. Now, look at Judges 6:23 though, and you're going to see, uh, you shall not die, do not fear, you shall not die. And this was after he had seen the angel of the Lord. This was after he had looked face to face. And no doubt it was scary when he realizes who he just saw. And knowing that no man shall see God and live, he was talking about this encounter with the angel. And so Gideon feared that looking at this may have either been something like an omen of his death, like seeing an angel and thinking, "Oh no, I'm fixing to die," and so an impending death is coming. But the Lord tells him, "No, you're not going to die. Even though you've seen an angel, even though you may think you are, you're not going to die." This promise could also carry through to God being with Gideon as he carries out his first assignment. His first assignment is when God tells him to go tear down this altar. And we're not told exactly how God spoke to Gideon. It says that he does. May have well been by the angel that had just came to him. Could have been in another way, but we know that God says something to him. Exactly how, in verse 25, is not given. But he tells him to take this 7-year-old bull, and looking at this second bull, some people say the word second there very similar to the word fat, a good large sized bull. And he's going to take this, actually going to take two of them uh, to do this kind of demolition. You would think it would be, it could easily be done with two, the first and a second bull. But looking at the word second, some versions here have the word fat, but just something interesting to look at that word second. But let's say he has two here, and one of them being reserved for a sacrifice, one of them being used to knock down this altar. Gideon's first assignment involved him cleaning up his own residence. His father had violated God's will by sponsoring this altar to Baal. And there was a pole by it, an image, a wooden image by it that would be like an Asherah pole, a pole that some of them set up for several hundred years. We see trouble with these Asherah pole, an idol here that they would set it up. And so God wants him to take this wooden idol and burn it on this altar. And interesting that this is just I don't know what else to say except the genius of God to show who is in control, that this wooden image has no power of its own. Baal has no power. Baal was, he didn't even exist really. Asherah, these gods, we have to remember, were people they made up, or maybe it was an image of something that was something they made up, or could have been modeled after someone who lived years ago, and that person that it's modeled after is gone, and they made up these fictional characters about it, and they have no power. And this Asherah pole, this idol. By the way, that was a goddess, the Asherah pole, the mother goddess, the consort to Baal in the Old Testament. This was burned on the altar to God, and we have here a situation where he's told to do this, and he does it at night, really for fear. But the interesting thing about him doing it at night is when the people get up, this all is done. Now he does it for fear, but it really turns out good. And we don't know exactly how much they would have tried to stop him had he done this in the middle of the day. We don't see him going berserk, and we have to remember this as servants of God. God wants us to do things wisely too. There was nothing wrong with Gideon going and doing this by night. That does not mean that he did not have faith. It was a wise thing for him to do, really. And it also got the job done quicker. When they were trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in the days of Nehemiah, and the people were trying to stop them, they didn't stop them from rebuilding those walls, but they certainly slowed it down. And with Gideon doing this at night, his job that he had to do for God was not slowed down. And looking at Joash's response, I love what Joash says when they come to him and say, your son has done this thing. And Joash appears to have some sort of power, maybe as the head of the community of Ophrah in some way. Seems to be on his land. This is done anyway. Seems to be here that without him, not much of it would be allowed. But his answer, Joash's answer to the men who come to him and complain about Gideon and even want Gideon's death. Joash is such a good father. Now, I teach fatherhood classes at night for our courts here in Walker County. And one of the things, a father has to be is a protector. Joash is such a good example of protecting his son, especially when it was something as ridiculous as what these men were wanting to do. And when they ask around and find out, of course, it didn't take long. They hired 10 people, so it didn't take long to figure out who done it. But they go to Joash, they bring out your son that he may die. They were going to kill his son in front of him because his son went against the idols they weren't supposed to be doing anyway. He tore down the altar of Baal, who wasn't a god anyway. Cut down the wooden image that was beside it, who wasn't a god anyway. Burned it. They should have thanked him for bringing them back to the true God. But they didn't. But that didn't stop Joash. Joash didn't just cower away and let them. No. Joash said to all, look at this. Who stood against him? And what he says shuts them up. Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Look at who you are. You're supposed to be a mere mortal, and Baal's supposed to be a god. You're going to save a god? And then he says this, let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself because his altar has been torn down. There you go. You prove that he's a god. If it's really a god, then hey, it's he's going to be taking care of vengeance his own self, isn't he? And wouldn't he, if he is a god like you're saying he is, then wouldn't he be angry if you really stepped in and tried to do it for him? Well, to see if something is from God or not, or from uh, you know, from I'm trying to have say a way to put the spiritual entities, to see if these things have power. You have people like there was another showdown between Baal and a prophet of God too. And I just want to stop right here and ask you a question. Who was the other prophet who had a big showdown between himself, the prophets of Baal, and an altar? So let's just ask this. Who was the other prophet who had a showdown between himself and the prophets of Baal? Let's see if we can get this. Who was it? Oh, all right. Here they're coming. Okay. Got an answer from Cookie, got an answer from Emily, and they are different answers. Anyone else want to answer who was the other prophet of God who had a showdown between himself and the prophets of Baal and an altar? All right. The answers that I have are Moses and then Elijah. Well, the correct answer is Elijah. Remember when Elijah and the prophets of Baal had their showdown, that there were 400 prophets of Baal, and Elijah was trying to win the people back over to God. And he said, how long will you halter between these two opinions, serve God or serve Baal, so to speak? And so he had both sides to build an altar, and he built his altar, they built their altar, and he said, you go first. Remember that? And they went first and just spent all morning hollering out to Baal, and then they started cutting themselves and they started screaming louder. And Elijah was mocking them, saying, well, maybe he's gone on a journey, scream louder, or maybe he's asleep and you can wake him up. And they go and they go all morning, and I'm in 1 Kings chapter 18, by the way. And Elijah has them to put water on his altar. Elijah has them to soak it with a ditch around his altar. And he calls to God one time, and God sends fire from heaven and consumes his altar. And the people see that God is real, and they killed these 450 prophets of Baal. I believe I said 400 while ago. It was 450. And this was on Mount Carmel, the victory on Mount Carmel. So here were these prophets of Baal still going on, long through the judges, through the kings. During the middle of the kings, we have the Baal worship. You do not see Baal worship after the Babylonian captivity. That straightened the Israelites out. They never went back and worshiped other gods after that. That was over. That set them straight. But in 1 Kings chapter 18, you have a showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Now, looking at this, Joash's advice on Baal reminds me a lot of Gamaliel's advice in Acts chapter 5. I'm going to go to Acts chapter 5, and I'm going to look at verses 33 following. Acts 5 and verse 33. Yes, 33 and the verses following. That's what FF stands for, verses following. Okay. So in this case, Peter and the apostles were preaching the gospel. They were told not to do this. They did it anyway. Peter said we ought to obey God rather than men. And they were furious about this. And Gamaliel stands up and gives some very good advice. And I'm in verse 33. When they heard this, they were furious and plotted to kill them. Then one in the council stood up, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in respect by all the people, and commanded them to put the apostles outside for a little while. And let me stop right here. Gamaliel seems to have a high commanding presence of the people, just like Joash did. They listened to him. He commanded the apostles to be put outside, and that's what they did. Notice that. Now, verse 35, and he said to them, men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody. A number of men, about 400, joined him. He was slain, and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of the census and drew away many people after him. He also perished, and all who obeyed him were dispersed. And now I say to you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this work is of men, it will come to nothing. But if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest you even be found to fight against God. And they agreed with him. And when they had called the apostles and beaten them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and every house, they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. The advice of Gamaliel and the advice of Joash are so similar to each other. And the basic thing about the advice is this: if God needs to take care of this, he will. That's what Gamaliel said. You don't fight against it if it's of God. If it's not, it's just going to come to nothing. Joash said, if Baal can take care of this, he will. Don't you worry about it. Who would plead for Baal? Let him be put to death. How dare him indicate that Baal is so weak that he needs a man to step in his place and take vengeance. That's such good psychology. And on that day, they called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him because he has torn down the altar. Now, Jerubbaal has quite a few meanings that different scholars have put to this name. Let me read you some of these, and I'm going all the way back to, if you're familiar with the old works, if you ever heard of Tyndale, I won't go into that. Tyndale and Wycliffe and some of those old commentators back when the Bible was just being translated into English. So these are some of the possible meanings of Jerubbaal. May Baal give increase is one. Another one, let Baal sue. Like you sue someone in court, let Baal sue. Another one, let Baal strive. Another one, let Baal plead. Another one, let Baal contend. Another one, Baal founds, Founds. It's interesting wording. Another one, discomforter of Baal. Another one, adversary of Baal. Another one, a Baal fighter. But looking at this, and these names, they're going to call him Jerubbaal. They're going to give this name to Gideon. Gideon's, and let me say this too. In this day and age, you would have been given a name connected with Baal at your birth. And this would not have been given to him at birth because it's given to him that day. But there is some significance in knowing that names about Baal were given to the people when they were born. But this name has changed, and Gideon is called Jerubbaal by the people, which has, as you can tell, something to do with him versus Baal, and Baal taking care of Baal himself. Whatever the meaning is, doesn't really matter, because you notice God never called him Jerubbaal. God called him Gideon. Hewer, the one who fells the images. That's the name that God gave him. A much more righteous name, a much better name. And this is where the chapter ends, in him getting this name. And after, I'm going to say that it doesn't end right there. We have one more thing I want to go to, actually. Let me take that back. We're near to the end. But Gideon does something that I wish the man of God of Judah that we studied the other day, that was eaten by the lion because the old prophet lied to him. Gideon did something better than the prophet did. He wanted to make sure that this was God. And the only way he could know it was of God would be if something could be done that was above the possibility of something being done by man, miraculous. So he says, if this is God, if you're going to save Israel by my hand, I'm going to lay this fleece out on the threshing floor. And if there's dew on the fleece only, and the whole ground is dry, then I'm going to know it's you. And he does that. And so then the next morning, he reverses it. His request is, let's reverse it. And I love his humble attitude in verse 39. Do not be angry with me. But now let's try it the opposite way. Let it be dry only on the fleece, but let the ground be wet. And the next day, that was the way it was on this threshing floor. Here he is. He is in this threshing floor. And there's something to be said when you see Gideon, and this is where he is. In verse 11, going back up, Gideon is threshing wheat. Where? In the wine press. Why? To hide it from the Midianites. Wheat and wine apparently does not come in at the same time. I'm not familiar on those times of coming in, but in a wine press, he was threshing wheat to hide it, and they wouldn't think to look there. He's in a place of hiding, and it is in this place where he gives a test. He lays out the fleece, and he looks at it, and it actually, comes about to be the way he requested. And so we have chapter 7 beginning with Gideon, that then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. Told you he was called Gideon to God. All of these people here that he gets together going, they start the war. So that's where we're going to start next week. Judges chapter 7 and this battle. I know that there was a lot of detail between the Midianite suppression and Gideon's call, but it all has to lead up to what happens to Gideon. You can't just cut part of that out, and it happened that way. You see, it had to be that he got the people ready for God. It had to be that he had to get rid of this altar, and God was testing him out. You know, Gideon tested God. God tested Gideon first, saying, you know, here's your assignment to go and tear this down. He does it and obeys God. Has 10 men hired to do it, and we're going to see him having the whole army, albeit small. We're going to see him having the whole army in chapter 7. And Gideon is going to be one of the judges of Israel before this story is over. Not only a hero, but a judge. And we'll get to that in next week's lesson. Thank you for listening. And thank you for answering these questions with us. And next week, we're going to meet at 7 o'clock. And we're going to go over the battle scene, Lord willing, between Gideon and the Midianites and how Gideon rids the land of Midian. So thank you for listening. Thank you for chiming in. And we will meet Sunday at 11 o'clock at the building for our worship service. Lord willing, when we come back, we will come back here at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And a sweet message here from Cookie just popped up. Said, "Thank you, love our church family. I absolutely do. I love y'all. I miss y'all. I missed I missed the handshakes and hugs we used to could give. We can't do that now, and it's been so long since I feel like I've just purposely touched another person from my family as by way of handshakes or a hug or just something like that. And I do miss that. We are made to be with other people. And I miss the church family that cannot come and worship with us. But we totally understand that such is the way things are right now. So Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, we plan to be here on this YouTube channel. Tomorrow night, we will not get to do our Google Meet. The football game was moved up for the hurricane. So we'll have to get with our Bible Bowl team and schedule another time with you. Drew will be playing in this ball game. So we're not going to be able to do that. So come, we'll just try to get word. We'll just try to get word to you, okay, when we can meet again on a Google Meet session and study our Bible bowls. So I do hope you have a good rest of the week. And until then, I want to say, may God bless you with his richest blessings. Keep everyone on our prayer list in your prayers, we ask. That is on our Dovertown Lifelines on Facebook. And until then, may God richly bless you. Thank you and good night.